Ethan Rivers had everything most people only dream about. At just 27, he had built a tech startup from a cramped apartment bedroom and turned it into a multi-million-dollar company. Newspapers called him the golden boy of innovation. Investors fought over the chance to work with him, and his luxurious penthouse on the 42nd floor overlooked the entire city. Yet despite all the success, Ethan lived with a quiet emptiness he never allowed anyone to see. His parents had passed away when he was 18, leaving him to navigate the world alone. He buried himself in work, in numbers, in constant growth, but the loneliness followed him like a cold shadow. Still, no one knew, not even Clara. Clara had been his housekeeper for almost 3 years. A quiet middle-aged woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, she arrived every morning exactly at 7 a.m., cleaned with almost sacred care, and left without ever asking for anything. Ethan barely spoke to her. He assumed she had a simple life, maybe a small house somewhere, maybe a family. He never thought too much about it, until one morning, a morning that would change everything. Ethan woke earlier than usual, feeling restless. His schedule had been cleared because of a canceled investor meeting, and for the first time in months, he had nothing to do. He wandered through his spotless penthouse, noticing how every corner smelled faintly of lavender, Clara's signature scent. And suddenly, he realized something strange. He didn't actually know anything about the woman who took care of his home. She had always been there, quiet, reliable, invisible in the rhythm of his busy life. He never asked where she lived, how she was, or what burdens she carried, and for some reason, that bothered him. On impulse, driven by a feeling he couldn't explain, Ethan grabbed his car keys and decided, I'll visit her today, just to thank her, just to see how she's doing. He didn't call. He didn't text. He simply drove. But the moment he arrived at the address listed on her employment file, a crumbling building on the outskirts of the city, something inside him shifted. He looked at the peeling paint, the broken windows, the silence around the entrance, and felt a knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't anything like he expected. He stepped out of the car, walked up the narrow staircase, and approached her door, apartment 3B. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was crossing a line, but something pushed him forward. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. But then, from inside, he heard a faint sound, a cough, weak and strained, like someone fighting for air. Clara, he called softly. No reply. Instinct took over. Ethan pushed the door gently, and to his surprise, it wasn't locked. He stepped inside, and the sight before him froze him where he stood. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about success, about gratitude, about value, began to crack at the edges in that single, breathless moment. The air inside the small apartment felt heavy, almost suffocating. Ethan stood frozen at the doorway, trying to understand what he was seeing. The contrast between his immaculate penthouse and Clara's home hit him like a punch to the stomach. The living room was barely furnished, an old sofa with torn fabric, a single lamp flickering weakly, and a small table stacked with papers, medicine bottles, and bills. The wallpaper peeled in several places, revealing dark stains underneath. A draft slipped in through a cracked window, carrying the distant sounds of traffic from the street below. But what truly broke Ethan's composure was seeing Clara lying on a thin mattress on the floor, wrapped in a blanket far too small to keep anyone warm. Her face, usually calm and composed at his apartment, looked pale and fragile. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead, and her breath came out shallow and ragged. Clara, he whispered again, stepping closer. Her eyes fluttered open, slow and unfocused. When she saw him, confusion crossed her face, followed by embarrassment, as if she were ashamed of being seen in such a vulnerable state. Mr. Rivers? Her voice cracked. Why are you here? He knelt beside her. You weren't at work. I wanted to check on you. What's going on? Why didn't you call anyone? She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. Ethan gently supported her, realizing how frail she felt under his hands. I didn't want to bother you, she murmured. You have so much on your plate already. I thought it would pass, but it hadn't. It clearly hadn't passed at all. Ethan glanced at the scattered medication bottles. Most empty, some expired. The labels indicated treatments for chronic respiratory problems, inflammation, and severe fatigue. On the table, past due notices lay in a messy pile. Unpaid electric bills, medical debts, and warnings of eviction. "Clara, how long has this been happening?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. "A few months. Maybe more." "Months?" Ethan felt anger rising, not at her, but at himself, at the world, at whatever had forced her into suffering and silence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" She turned her face away, shame tightening her features. "People like me don't ask people like you for help. I clean your house. I'm grateful you gave me this job. That's already more than life usually gives." Her words cut deeper than she intended, leaving Ethan speechless. People like me. People like you. He had never thought of himself as someone unreachable, but hearing it from her, in that weak voice, opened a wound he didn't know he had. He looked around again. The sagging shelves, the empty refrigerator visible from where he knelt, the single pair of shoes placed neatly by the door. This wasn't a temporary struggle. This wasn't bad luck. This was a life built on surviving one day at a time, one paycheck at a time, one silent sacrifice after another. And she had been doing all of this, while showing up at his penthouse every morning with calm dignity, never letting him see her exhaustion. "Clara, you need a doctor," Ethan said firmly. She shook her head instantly. "I can't afford it, and I can't lose my job. Please don't fire me. I'll get better, I promise." Fire her? The thought felt absurd, heartbreaking even. "You're not losing your job," he said, voice steady. "You're getting help. Right now." Her eyes filled with tears, fear mixed with gratitude. But before she could protest, again, another sound cut through the apartment. A soft, wavering cry. Ethan turned his head sharply toward the sound coming from the next room. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it was unmistakable. A young voice, weak and trembling. "Clara, is someone else here?" She closed her eyes tightly, as if wishing she could hide the truth forever. Her breathing grew uneven. "My grandson," she whispered. "He's just 7. His mother, my daughter, passed away last year. I'm all he has." The cry came. Again, this time louder. Ethan stood slowly, his chest tightening with a feeling he couldn't describe. With careful steps, he moved toward the small door at the end of the hallway. He hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open, and what he saw inside the dimly lit room changed something fundamental inside him. Something deep, something irreversible. It was in that moment he realized this wasn't just about helping Clara. This was about confronting the world he had ignored, the world he had been blind to while chasing success. And it was about a choice he would have to make, one that would redefine not only his future, but the future of 2 lives silently collapsing behind that door. The small room was dimly lit by a single lamp, its light trembling like a candle struggling to stay alive. The air felt colder here, almost still, as if time hesitated to pass. Ethan took one quiet step forward, his breath catching the moment his eyes adjusted to the shadows. In the corner of the room, curled beneath a thin blanket, was a little boy, frail, trembling, and far too quiet for a child his age. His knees were pulled to his chest, his head resting on them, and when he lifted his gaze toward Ethan, there was a fear in his eyes that no child should ever have to carry. He looked no older than 7, just like Clara had said. Yet his expression held the weight of someone who had lived through far more than 7 years of hardship. His cheeks were hollow, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The room around him revealed even more. The cracked walls, the empty shelf holding only one worn-out stuffed animal, the absence of toys, books, or anything that suggested a childhood. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, piercing ache, like a truth stabbing right through his heart. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling near the child but keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Ethan. I'm a friend of your grandma. Are you okay?" The boy swallowed hard. His voice was a fragile whisper. "Grandma's sick. I didn't know what to do." Ethan's throat tightened. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lucas." A simple name, a fragile voice, a life carrying too many burdens. The boy's eyes drifted toward the wall separating the room from the living area where Clara lay, struggling to breathe. "I tried to give her water," he murmured, "but she couldn't get up. I got scared." Ethan sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the reality unfolding before him. This wasn't just poverty. It was abandonment by a society that never looked twice at the ones who worked quietly, cleaning the floors and dusting the corners no one else touched. People like Clara lived in the shadows, unseen, until their suffering grew too large to hide. Lucas, Ethan said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. Everything is going to be okay. I'm going to help her, and I'm going to help you too. The boy lowered his head, not fully believing him. Perhaps he had heard too many promises in his short life, promises that were never kept. Ethan stood and walked back to the living room, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't untangle. Clara lay as he left her, breath shallow, eyes closed. He knelt next to her again. She shouldn't be here, he whispered to himself. Neither of them should be living like this. His gaze swept over the room. The unpaid bills, the medication containers, the old furniture, the small details that told the story of a hard life fought silently, without recognition, without relief. He thought of his own home, the granite countertops, the automated lighting, the refrigerator full of untouched food, the empty rooms filled with expensive furniture he never used. For the first time, those luxuries felt meaningless, hollow in a way he had never noticed. Clara's eyelids fluttered open again. When she saw the worry in his face, she tried to smile. "Please, don't trouble yourself," she whispered, voice faint. "I can manage." "No," Ethan said, the firmness of his tone surprising even himself. "You can't manage anymore, and you don't have to." Tears gathered in her eyes, tears she had probably held back for months, maybe years. "Clara," he continued, "why didn't you tell me you were taking care of your grandson? Why didn't you say anything?" More tears fell. "I didn't want to lose my job. Taking care of a child. Some employers don't like that. And Lucas has been through so much already." Ethan reached out, taking her hand. She stiffened at first. She wasn't used to being touched with care, but slowly relaxed. "You're not losing your job," he said with unwavering certainty. "I'm taking you both to a hospital. Now. After that, we'll figure out everything else together. You won't go through this alone." Clara tried to speak, but emotion stole her breath. Lucas stood a few steps behind, watching them with cautious hope. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. His voice was steady as he explained the situation, but his hands trembled, because this was no longer about obligation. It was no longer about surprise or sympathy. Something deeper was awakening in him. A sense of responsibility, yes, but also something gentler. A connection. A recognition of humanity he had forgotten while building his empire. As they waited for the ambulance, Ethan saw the truth clearly. This moment, this old apartment, this fragile grandmother and her trembling grandson, they were going to change his life, not because he chose it, but because life had finally opened his eyes. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the sharp sting of humility, the warmth of compassion, and the stirring of something like purpose. And it was only the beginning. The ambulance arrived faster than expected, its distant siren slicing through the quiet morning like a warning that life was about to change direction. As the paramedics entered the apartment, their expressions shifted subtly, as if they weren't just stepping into a medical emergency, but into a story that had been unfolding silently for far too long. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Clara. She checked her pulse, her breathing, and the faint bluish tint around her lips. "She's dehydrated," the paramedic murmured. "Severe fatigue, possibly an infection. She needs care immediately." Ethan stepped aside to give them space, but every second felt like a thread tightening around his chest. Lucas clung to the doorway, eyes wide, trying to understand what was happening, afraid that someone might take his grandmother away forever. When the paramedics gently lifted Clara onto the stretcher, he reached out instinctively. "Grandma!" His small voice cracked with fear. Ethan crouched down beside him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's going to the hospital to get better," he whispered. "You're coming too. You're not staying here alone." Lucas nodded hesitantly, tears brimming in his eyes. As they carried Clara out of the apartment, Ethan followed, turning one last time to look at the place where she had survived for years. The silence in those rooms held stories he would never know. Late nights praying for enough money. Mornings waking up exhausted, but still going to work. Evenings comforting Lucas through his grief. That tiny apartment had been a battleground, and Clara had fought alone. The building's neighbors peeked through cracked doors as Ethan escorted the paramedics outside. Their eyes held curiosity, pity, and perhaps a touch of recognition. Clara was someone they all knew, the quiet woman who worked hard and asked for nothing. Seeing her carried away made some of them lower their gazes in silent respect. Outside, Ethan opened the door of his car and helped Lucas in before climbing into the ambulance with Clara. The boy sat in the back seat of the car, trembling, still unsure if trusting Ethan was the right thing. But he had no choice, and deep down, he felt something sincere in Ethan's voice. During the ride, the paramedic monitored Clara's breathing while Ethan sat by her side, holding her hand gently. He kept replaying everything in his mind: the little boy alone in the cold room, the unpaid bills, Clara trying to hide her illness to keep her job. Every memory cut deeper than the last. At the hospital, nurses rushed Clara into an examination room. Ethan stood back with Lucas, watching the doors swing shut. Lucas's small hand gripped Ethan's tightly, seeking reassurance from the only adult who seemed to care at that moment. Hours passed. Ethan stayed in the hospital with them, refusing to return to his penthouse or his meetings. He bought Lucas food, though the boy barely touched it. He talked to doctors, filled out forms, and made calls. He felt a growing sense of involvement, not as a boss, not as a benefactor, but as someone whose life had become intertwined with theirs. When the doctor finally approached, Ethan stood immediately. Lucas straightened too, holding his breath. "She's stable now," the doctor said, "but her body is extremely weak. She has been working far beyond her physical limits. She needs rest, treatment, and proper nutrition." Relief washed over Ethan, but it was followed by anger. Anger at himself, at the circumstances, at a world that allowed this kind of suffering to exist unnoticed. "Can she come home soon?" Ethan asked. The doctor shook his head. "Not yet. She needs a few days of observation. But more importantly, her living situation isn't safe. She shouldn't be in that environment with a child, especially while she's recovering." Lucas lowered his head. He knew the doctor was right. Ethan exhaled slowly, then spoke words he hadn't planned or rehearsed. Words that seemed to come from a deeper place inside him. "They won't be going back there," he said firmly. "They'll stay with me." Lucas looked up, startled. "With you?" "Yes," Ethan said softly. "Both of you, until your grandmother gets better. And after that, we'll figure out something. Better than that old apartment." The doctor nodded approvingly, and Lucas blinked several times, unsure if he was dreaming. No one had ever offered them help like this before. Certainly not someone like Ethan. Someone who lived in a world so different it might as well have been another planet. As the day passed, Ethan sat by Clara's bedside, watching her breathe peacefully for the first time in what seemed like years. Lucas eventually curled up in one of the chairs and fell asleep, exhausted from the emotional storm of the day. Ethan watched them both, feeling something shift profoundly inside him. He had spent years achieving everything society celebrated: wealth, recognition, success, but none of it had ever given him purpose. Not real purpose. Not the kind that filled the quiet emptiness inside him. But now, sitting in that stark hospital room, with a fragile grandmother and a grieving child depending on him, Ethan felt something he had long forgotten. He felt needed. He felt responsible. He felt human again. And though he didn't say it out loud, he knew this moment was about to change the course of all three of their lives. Because what he had seen inside that apartment wasn't just poverty. It was resilience. It was sacrifice. It was love fighting to survive. And he wasn't going to walk away from it. Not now. Not ever. The following days unfolded in a way Ethan could never have predicted. His life, once dominated by meetings, schedules, deadlines, and presentations, became centered around something completely different: Clara's recovery, Lucas's safety, and the overwhelming responsibility he had willingly taken on. Clara remained in the hospital under observation, gaining strength little by little. Nurses commented on how her vitals improved each day, how color slowly returned to her face, and how the tension in her posture eased whenever Ethan or Lucas entered the room. She still looked fragile, and exhaustion clung to her like a shadow, but hope, gentle and steady, began to shine through her tired eyes. Meanwhile, Ethan took Lucas to his penthouse. The boy's reaction was quiet amazement mixed with hesitation, like someone stepping into a world he believed existed only in movies. Lucas stood at the doorway of the penthouse's living room, staring at the enormous windows that showcased the entire city stretching out like a blanket of lights. "You live here?" Lucas whispered, barely daring to breathe. "For now," Ethan said, kneeling beside him. "And until your grandma comes home." This is your place too. Lucas blinked several times, unsure if he was allowed to touch anything, if he was allowed to sit, if he was allowed to exist freely in a place so different from his own world. His hands remained close to his sides, tense, ready to pull back at the slightest sign of disapproval. Ethan noticed immediately. "You don't need to be afraid, Lucas," he said softly. "This is a safe place. No one will shout at you. No one will tell you what you can't do. You're welcome here." Lucas gave a shy nod, but his shoulders remained stiff. Trauma doesn't disappear in a day. Trust doesn't blossom instantly. Ethan understood that. Wanting to make him feel comfortable, Ethan led him to one of the spare bedrooms. Large, airy, with soft lighting and a bed that looked like a warm cloud. "I thought this room could be yours," Ethan said, "if you like it." Lucas's reaction wasn't what Ethan expected. Tears filled the boy's eyes. "Are you sad?" Ethan asked quickly. Lucas shook his head, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "No, it's just, I've never had a room before. I've always slept in the same room as Grandma, sometimes on the floor, sometimes on the mattress. I didn't know rooms like this were real." Ethan felt something squeeze painfully inside his chest. He knelt and looked Lucas in the eyes. "You deserve this. You deserve safety, comfort, a childhood." Lucas stared at him, surprised, maybe because no one had ever said those words to him before. As the days passed, Ethan built a routine around the boy. He drove him to the hospital each morning so he could see Clara, and after each visit, he took him somewhere new. A park, a bookstore, a bakery where Lucas chose pastries with wide-eyed wonder. The boy was cautious, always expecting the kindness to end, but Ethan remained patient. Slowly, Lucas began to relax. He smiled more. His shoulders loosened. He started asking questions, curious, innocent ones that children ask when they feel safe. "Do you work in a big building? Do you have friends? Did you always have a nice house? Do you miss your mom and dad?" That last question caught Ethan off guard. He inhaled gently. "Every day," he said. Lucas nodded knowingly. "I miss my mom every day too." For the first time, they understood each other not as an adult and a child, not as a millionaire and a boy from a poor neighborhood, but as two souls carrying invisible grief. One afternoon, while Clara was resting, Ethan spoke privately with the social worker who had been assigned to her case. The woman explained the harsh reality in calm, practiced tones. "Your housekeeper has no savings, no health insurance, and no stable support system. Her grandson is legally in her care, but her current living conditions are unsafe. Without intervention, both could face serious challenges." Ethan listened carefully. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying she needs a sustainable solution. Financial assistance, housing, medical support, and emotional stability. You stepping in has helped more than you realize, but her long-term survival depends on someone advocating for her. Someone advocating for her. Someone, not a government program, not distant relatives, not strangers. Someone who cared enough." Ethan realized that someone was him. He left the meeting with a decision already forming in his mind, a decision that felt both terrifying and strangely natural. That evening, he sat at the hospital while Clara slept. Lucas curled up in a chair, drawing quietly. The room was peaceful except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Ethan watched Clara's breathing. She looked better but still fragile. Her hands were thin, her cheeks hollow from months of sacrifice. She had given everything she had to protect the boy beside her, and life had given her nothing in return, except struggle. Ethan felt a swell of emotion he couldn't hold back. He stood, walked to the window, and stared at the city lights, bright, distant, indifferent. His reflection looked different now. Not the polished entrepreneur seen in interviews, not the young millionaire praised in magazines, but a man who had been asleep for years, a man who was finally waking up. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I can't let them go back to that life." Behind him, Clara stirred. Her voice was faint but steady. "Ethan, why are you doing all this?" He turned slowly. Clara's eyes were open, full of confusion and humility, like someone who had spent a lifetime believing she wasn't worthy of kindness. "You should be home," she whispered. "You have work. You have a life. You don't owe me anything." Ethan approached her bedside. "That's where you're wrong." She blinked. "Wrong?" He pulled a chair close and sat, his voice low and sincere. "I didn't see you before. Not really. You kept my home clean, and I never asked who you were, what you carried, how hard your life was. I lived with blinders on. Wealth, Makes it easy to overlook people's suffering, especially the suffering of those who serve us silently. Clara tried to protest, but he raised a hand gently. You helped me more than you know, he said. When my parents died, I threw myself into work. I built everything I have today on pain I never dealt with. You were the one constant presence in my home, quiet, steady, and I never thanked you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Ethan? No, he continued softly. Let me finish. I'm not helping you out of pity. I'm helping you because you deserve dignity. You deserve rest. And Lucas, he deserves a chance at a life that isn't defined by loss. Clara covered her mouth, overwhelmed. I made a decision, Ethan said firmly. When you leave this hospital, you're not going back to that old apartment. You and Lucas will stay with me for as long as it takes. I'll make sure you get medical care, food, safety, everything you never had. Clara shook her head in disbelief. I can't accept that. It's too much. You've done enough already. It's not charity, Ethan said gently. It's what's right. Lucas looked up from his drawing, eyes hopeful and bright. Grandma, please? We don't have to sleep on the floor anymore. Clara's lips trembled. She looked from the boy to Ethan, her heart torn between pride and love. Finally she whispered, voice breaking, Thank you, Ethan. I don't know how to repay you. You already did, he said softly. You reminded me what kind of man I want to be. And at that moment, a new bond formed between them. Not one of employer and employee, not one of charity, but of trust, of healing, of a shared path forward. Yet none of them knew that the biggest revelation, the one that would transform all their lives permanently, hadn't happened yet. The following weeks became a turning point in both Ethan's and Marisol's lives, weeks that neither of them could have predicted, weeks that felt like a storm of revelations, doubts, hopes, fears, and quiet miracles. Unfolding one by one, every day seemed to carry a new challenge, a new conversation, a new moment that chipped away at the invisible walls they had spent years building around themselves. And as those walls slowly cracked, something unexpected began to grow in the empty spaces left behind. Ethan found himself thinking constantly about what he had witnessed at Marisol's home, the sacrifice, the exhaustion, the silent heroism she had carried for years without complaint. It haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. He started waking up earlier, sitting by the window of his penthouse, staring at the skyline and asking himself questions he had never asked before, questions about meaning, purpose, and the kind of man he wanted to be. Marisol, on the other hand, struggled deeply with the sudden shift in her life. Ethan's kindness overwhelmed her. His generosity scared her. She didn't know how to process it. She didn't know whether to trust it. Every time he offered help, she felt her chest tighten with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Fear of depending on someone, fear of being disappointed again, fear of allowing herself to hope. But despite her hesitation, fate seemed determined to pull their lives closer together. One afternoon, Ethan arrived unexpectedly at the hospital, carrying a small notebook under his arm and a nervous expression he couldn't quite hide. Mateo's condition hadn't improved. His health continued to fluctuate, rising in small, hopeful steps only to fall again. Without warning, Ethan approached the child's bed and sat beside him, offering a smile that carried more tenderness than he was used to showing. I brought something for you, Ethan said softly. Mateo blinked weakly. Is it a game? Not exactly. Ethan opened the notebook, revealing drawings, simple, childlike sketches he had stayed up half the night creating. I made something for us, a story, about a superhero named Mateo the Brave. The boy's eyes lit up, and Marisol, who had been standing silently in the corner, covered her mouth as tears began to spill down her cheeks. Ethan read the story aloud, his voice trembling at times, his heart tightening every time the boy smiled or laughed. After that day, it became a ritual. Ethan returned daily with new chapters, new drawings, new adventures for the superhero he had created. Mateo began waiting for him every afternoon, and even the nurses started leaving the door open when they heard the billionaire's voice reading from the notebook. The more Ethan showed up, the more Marisol's defenses began to slip. She saw how he sat with her son for hours, how he listened, how he tried, how he cared, not for appearances, not for charity, but because something inside him had changed. He was becoming a different man, and she could feel it in every word he spoke, in every small gesture he made. Yet, for every step forward, There was another shadow waiting. As Ethan became more present in their lives, the media began to take notice. Rumors spread. A billionaire spending time in a public hospital. A mysterious woman who worked as his cleaning lady. Whispers began swirling online, filled with assumptions, lies, and invasive speculation. Paparazzi started appearing near the hospital. The pressure began to suffocate Marisol, who had always lived quietly and anonymously. One day, she confronted Ethan in the hallway, her voice trembling, her hands shaking. "You don't understand what this is doing to me," she whispered. "To Mateo. I can't live like this. I don't want attention. I don't want cameras. I just want peace. My son needs peace." Ethan felt his breath leave his body. He tried to explain, tried to calm her, tried to promise he would fix everything, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can trust what's happening," she confessed. "I don't know if this is real or if it will disappear one day. All I know is that I can't let anything hurt my son, not even you." Those words pierced Ethan deeper than she could have imagined. He walked away that day carrying a weight he didn't know how to bear. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless, not because of money, or business, or success, but because he didn't know how to protect the people he cared about. He didn't know how to make her trust him. He didn't know how to fight against something he couldn't see. And as the days passed, the situation only grew more fragile. Mateo's condition worsened. The doctors began to use quiet, cautious words filled with dread, words no mother wants to hear. Marisol's strength began to crack under the pressure, and Ethan's heart broke a little more every time he saw her trying to hide her despair. He stayed by her side through sleepless nights, offering silent support, offering hope, even when he felt none. But the truth was unavoidable. A storm was coming, a storm neither of them were prepared for. And just when everything seemed to be falling apart, when all the threads of their journey seemed ready to snap at once, something happened, something none of them expected, something that would change everything that came after. But the story does not end here. The night that changed everything arrived without warning, quiet, cold, and carrying an unsettling stillness that both Ethan and Marisol felt before anyone spoke a single word. The hospital hallway was dim, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing eerily as Marisol paced in circles, her hands trembling, her breath unsteady. Ethan stood beside her, but even he could feel the fear creeping into his bones like icy water. Mateo had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Doctors rushed in and out of the room. Nurses whispered urgently. Machines beeped in sharp, frantic rhythms that stabbed through the silence. Marisol watched through the small window in the door, her heart crumbling a little more with every second that passed. When the doctor finally stepped out, his eyes lowered, his shoulders heavy, Marisol felt the floor vanish beneath her. "We're doing everything we can," he said softly, "but you need to prepare yourself." Her legs nearly gave out. Ethan caught her before she collapsed, holding her tightly as she sobbed into his chest, raw, desperate, broken in a way he had never witnessed from anyone in his life. He stroked her hair gently, whispering words he wasn't even sure she could hear. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. I promise you." But even he felt helpless as they were allowed into the room. Mateo lay still, his breathing shallow, his skin pale. Tubes and wires surrounded his small body, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room with a dreadful inevitability. Marisol sat on the edge of the bed, taking her son's hand into hers, kissing it over and over, tears falling freely. "My baby, my angel, I'm here. Mommy's here." Ethan stood frozen at first, unable to move, unable to speak. Then he slowly walked closer, pulling the worn notebook, the one containing the superhero stories, out of his jacket. His voice broke as he opened it. "Mateo," he whispered softly, I wrote the last chapter for you." Marisol looked up at him with tear-soaked eyes, and Ethan swallowed hard before sitting beside the bed. He began to read. His voice trembled, his eyes blurred. Sometimes he had to pause, breathe, steady himself, but he kept going, kept reading the story of Mateo the Brave, the superhero stronger than fear, stronger than darkness, stronger than anything life could throw at him. And as he read, something happened. Mateo moved, barely, a small twitch, but real. The heart monitor beep changed tone. Marisol gasped. The nurses noticed. A doctor rushed back in. Within minutes, the room transformed from a place of dread to one of fragile, overpowering hope. Mateo's eyes opened, weakly, slowly, but they opened. He whispered a single word, "Mom." Marisol collapsed in relief, covering his face with trembling kisses, sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan felt something inside him shatter and rebuild all at once. The doctor examined the boy, astonished. Mateo's vital signs were stabilizing. His breathing grew stronger. His color returned. No one had an explanation, only the visible miracle unfolding before them. Marisol grabbed Ethan's hand and squeezed it tightly. "You saved him. You saved my son." But Ethan shook his head slowly, voice cracking. "No, he saved me." Mateo's recovery, against every prediction, became the turning point of all their lives. The days that followed were filled with improvements so rapid the medical team could hardly keep up. His body regained strength. His appetite returned. His laughter echoed through the hospital hallways like a blessing no one expected. Marisol found herself smiling again, real smiles, full of light and gratitude. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt alive in a way no wealth had ever given him. They spent hours together, talking, sharing stories, revealing pieces of themselves they had never shared with anyone else. Ethan confessed the loneliness behind his empire. Marisol confessed the fears she had carried in silence for years. Each confession brought them closer, stitching their hearts with threads neither of them could ignore anymore. But their bond didn't escape the world's attention. The media frenzy intensified once Mateo's miraculous recovery became public. Headlines exploded. Cameras followed Ethan everywhere. Speculations about his relationship with Marisol filled the internet. Pressure grew. Rumors twisted the truth into something almost unrecognizable. Marisol panicked again. "I can't live like this," she told him one morning, her voice trembling. "I can't raise my son in the middle of a storm. I just want a peaceful life. I can't let him become a spectacle. I can't let myself be one either." Her fear tore Ethan apart. He wanted to protect her, shelter her, hide her from the world. But he knew he couldn't control everything. "I'll make it stop," he promised. "Whatever it takes." But Marisol only shook her head. "I don't want you to fight the world for me. I want you to fight for yourself, too." Those words echoed in Ethan's mind for days. And then, something shifted. He disappeared for 3 days. No calls, no messages, no warnings. Marisol feared the worst. But on the 4th day, Ethan returned, with a decision that would change everything. He walked into the hospital with calm, steady eyes, wearing simple clothes, not a trace of his usual billionaire aura. Even the bodyguards were gone. "I did something," he said softly. "Something I should have done long ago." Marisol frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan exhaled. "I stepped down." Marisol's breath caught. "What?" "I resigned," he repeated. "I sold my controlling shares. I walked away from the company. I walked away from all of it. The board has everything now. The media attention will fade." She stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" His voice softened to a whisper. "Because I don't want to be a man who owns the world and loses the only people who ever made him feel human." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "But Ethan, you built that empire." "I did," he said honestly, "but it never made me happy." "You did. Mateo did. You showed me what life really means. I didn't lose something, I reclaimed myself." Marisol couldn't speak. She covered her mouth, sobbing silently, overwhelmed by the depth of what he had given up, of what he had chosen. He stepped closer, gently wiping her tears. "I don't know what our future looks like," he admitted. "I don't know if you'll ever want a life with me, but I do know this. Wherever Mateo goes, wherever you go, that's where I want to be." She fell into his arms, crying into his chest as he held her tightly, his heart beating fast and full. In that moment, everything changed. Weeks later, Mateo was finally discharged from the hospital, healthy, smiling, full of life. Ethan helped Marisol carry bags to her car, and the three of them drove home together, laughing at silly jokes Mateo told from the back seat. The world outside had already begun to forget the scandal. But Ethan, he didn't want the world anymore. He only wanted them. When they reached Marisol's small house, the same place where everything had begun, she stepped onto the doorstep, looked at Ethan, and whispered, "Do you want to come in?" He smiled softly. "I was hoping you'd ask." Inside, everything felt different, not because the house had changed, but because they had, changed. The broken pieces were still there, But now they glowed with the gold of healing, of love, quietly blooming without permission. Mateo ran inside, laughing as he scattered toys across the floor. Marisol turned to Ethan. "What now?" she asked. Ethan took her hands. "Now, we start over, together. Not as a billionaire and his cleaning lady, not as two broken souls trying to survive, but as people who found each other when life was falling apart." Her eyes softened. "And the ending?" she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "This isn't an ending," he said. "It's the first chapter of something new." She leaned forward and kissed him, slowly, timidly at first, then with the full weight of everything they had endured, everything they had felt, everything they had become. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Welcome home, Ethan." And for the first time in his entire life, he truly felt like he was